Peace out.
Look at that eye, Fletch. Doctor's coming in.
The doctor is here. Howard Foster. Now they're seeing whether he can actually see out of that eye. This is a huge moment in the career of Joe Joyce. And he is going to be allowed for now to carry on, Richie, but he can't have much more time in there.
No, he's just got to go for it now, Joe Joyce. All or nothing now. Because that eye is not going to be able to take much more damage.
How long will Howard Foster let it go?
That's the big question here. And again, he's getting caught left, right and centre with that left hand from Zhang. Again, the movement's a little bit more to the right. He's moving on to that shot. Got to move to his left. Too static and getting caught with that straight left hand every time. And Howard Foster's now having another look.
Here comes the doctor again for the second time in round 6.
Hello and welcome back to the #1 podcast in the sport, where we finally have Ben's boxing channel. Ben Shalom's inked his deal with the BBC, which I think is an interesting proposition. And to be honest, I have no idea which way that this will go. I can't tell you for 1 second how this movie ends, but I'm 100% here for the ride, because in a weird way, I like Ben. And I like Ben because I think trying to compete with Hernan Warren is a thankless task. So the fact that he put his hand up and said, I'll do it, credit to him, because, I mean, better people than him or I have tried and they have failed too. So kudos to him for doing it. But I guess it reveals a lot about where boxing is right now. So the important thing to understand is, how did we end up here? And people will say that Sky were disillusioned with Ben Shalom. And my understanding is Ben wasn't the problem. Yeah, there are things you can say about Ben, and, you know, maybe he took a few years to get into the games that drive views and engagement, right? And eventually he got dragged into it. And I think that's fine. And we now know a bit more of his personality, which is good. He needs to stop suing people and threatening to sue people, though. Just a side note, don't be doing that now. You know, when you start threatening to sue people, because I hear it, people message me saying that, you know, the lawyers are threatened. We don't need to do that in boxing. I don't like that. And that's not just a Ben thing. In boxing in general, unless something is factually untrue and is harmful to your revenue, look, man, a bit of back and forth never hurt anybody, is my take. But let's just go back to how we got here. So the main driver of this was the realization that Sky don't have the money. Yeah, this is purely a strategic decision, and it will come down from Comcast. So Comcast, the parent company, will drive a lot of this, because everyone will get instructions. Right, we need you to take 20% off costs. You don't have a choice, right? So you start red penning stuff. And you can't just red pen stuff. You have to kind of go through a process and meetings. There's a load of politics around it. But what would happen traditionally is, anytime someone tried to say, yeah, we're gonna cut down on our boxing spend, a separate part of the business, which is Sky Box Office, would say, you can't do that, because we need that. That business is a 10 million a year revenue stream for us and the company. We need to keep that running. Okay? And so it would carry on. And what happened over the last probably 3 or 4 years is the Sky Box Office guys couldn't bang the drum anymore, because they weren't getting the money. And so the question was, what's happening with the boxing? Who are our pay-per-view stars? And it was just becoming really clear that boxing's center of gravity had moved away from Sky and towards DAZN. And I think once Queensberry and TNT separated, there was no longer a competitive advantage to having that heavy investment in boxing. So there were a number of factors that kind of came together where it was like, we don't need to invest in boxing. What we will do is we'll just buy in the rights. So if there's a big fight that happens in Vegas, we'll just buy the rights to the fight. If there's a big Saudi card, we'll buy the UK rights to the fight if DAZN don't already have them. And that put Ben's position in jeopardy, because Ben was really meant to have turned someone other than Eubank Jr. into a pay-per-view star. Like, let's just say Ben Whittaker hadn't been injured and they could have accelerated his development. Then you would have had an anchor name that was bringing big events to Sky and maybe a pay-per-view or two. But Ben, there were injuries and stuff, so his development hasn't been what people would have predicted, through no fault of his in many ways. But they haven't had that chance. The women's boxing was never going to work as a revenue driver. They gambled with that. That was probably a strategic error, and Hearn knew this from the start. And they should have taken the hint from Eddie Hearn and just gone, women's boxing, and sorry ladies, but will always be a sideshow to the men's event. And I respect what Jake Paul's doing with MVP. That's got a ceiling on it too, and Jake will realize that in about 2 years. There's an economic ceiling to those fights, unless we're willing to introduce more jeopardy, and either that is more rounds for the women at 2 minutes or longer rounds for the women. And, that may come with health risks as well. But the big picture is this. Sky realized that it's cheaper to just buy in the rights than it is to put these shows on. And so if that's your strategic direction, you don't really need Ben, which was a real shame. And so I don't think it was we don't like Ben. It was just Ben didn't have the boxers in his stable that could generate the kind of money that would have other parts of the business supporting boxing. So boxing basically got assassinated in the boardroom. And so they said, look, just cancel that contract. What's the saving on that? I don't know, $1.5 million a year. Right, we'll bank that saving and we'll just work out what to do afterwards. So that left Ben with a problem. And that left boxing with a huge, huge problem. If you're Ben, you're sat at home, I don't know, wherever it is in Hertfordshire, and you're there, it's just there pulling your hair out going, this is so unfair. So I bet there was a point where Ben felt sorry for himself. He's just there like, why me? Yeah, which is fair and it's right. And then when you pull yourself together, you now look at the landscape. TNT have just pulled out of boxing for a similar reason. Discovery are like, why are we spending money on this? Is it driving additional subscribers? No. Oh, so you're telling me that the people who watch boxing would probably have the subscription anyway for the rugby, the football, the MotoGP, or the rallying? Yeah. Don't really need it then, do we? We can just buy in some rights if we need to, can't we? Yeah. Okay. Cut the boxing budget. That's why Frank went to DAZN. Okay? So you look at TNT, and TNT is not a viable option. You're like, then you've just come off Sky, so TNT is not a viable option. So you might talk to ITV. ITV go, we got it wrong last time. We're never going to get sign-off to do this in the current state of affairs. So now you're like, Then you think DAZN. Now imagine you're DAZN, and you're like, if we had Frank, Eddie, Ben, Izzy, let's not forget Izzy, we don't have enough viable slots for everybody to operate. We would just be running boxing shows every Friday, Saturday, Sunday, all year. We'd be running hot. And that's not economic for DAZN either, because people would just get fatigued. So nothing would feel special. And so DAZN's probably not a viable option either. And so now Ben's just there going, Channel 5 now, we're Wasserman for now. We can't break that contract. But I mean, there's no deal available that offers co-investment. So we will put money into the shows, we'll put money into the production, and then we'll take some of the upside when it comes through. None of those deals were available. So you're Benny, and it's just like, this can't be over before it began. And in the background, you've been working on the BBC. Then I remember when Dennis Hobson was working on a deal with the BBC, and Porky was a big driver behind that. I'm sure we issued some comms and some presentations and stuff. And the BBC were like, yeah, we might put you on this red button thing. I can't remember if it was iPlayer or the red button they had us on. So they did a few Hobson fights there. I don't know what the reaction was. Maybe it was like, this would have had a bigger impact if there were bigger names involved. I don't know. Don't know what the feedback was. I haven't asked. But Ben's clearly gone there and gone, right, let me see if I can get in here. And they've gone, who have you got on your roster? And it's like, okay, who do you think you can keep? And Ben's probably gone, Ben Whittaker's going to be expensive. Adam Azim's going to be expensive. We're probably not going to keep those guys. Boatsi's gone. And then you're looking at who can we really sort of run this through? And I still think you can run it through guys like Dan Aziz, Caroline Dubois, etc. The stable's competent enough, Jamie TKV. There are names there, Fraser Clark. There are names the public will know and understand. And those that they don't know and understand, you can build around them. So there's this thing that says, look, there's a deal to be done here. I think from Ben's perspective, he's looking at it like, well, maybe we're going to have to finance a lot more of these events, which means we've got to be more selective about venues we choose. We're definitely not doing another all-female card and all these sorts of things, right? Because he's going to shoulder a lot more of the risk. But the return, if this works, and I'm sure this is how he's thinking, I can build my guys into superstars, and then our payoff is things like Riyadh season, where we get some of that upside and the BBC gets some of that upside. And so the deal starts to make sense. The deal starts to kind of form, and you're like, I see where this is going. This is looking promising. Fair play to Big Boss Ben. Do your thing, right? And so it gets announced that it's a multi-fight, multi-year BBC deal. Everyone's happy, right? I'm happy, actually, because I'm like, I'd like to see Ben stay on in the sport. I want to see a new generation of promoter come through. You got Ben Shalom, you got Alfie. Obviously, Alfie's kind of been in and around the game longer, but Alfie's now building his situation. And then I'd love to see Alfie get a TV deal. I'd love to see Steve Goodwin get a TV deal. I'd love to see a lot of guys, Joe G, get a TV deal. Loads of guys I'd love to see get a TV deal because it'll help them attract fighters and you can guide careers properly. Now, will everyone get a TV deal? That's going to be tricky, but we shouldn't rule anyone out because I think a TV deal draws a different kind of fighter. So I can see the benefit of the BBC, but it's a hard journey. So if I'm looking at that and I'm trying to structure a deal with the BBC, I'm looking at, okay, where can I put my content? Am I putting my content on iPlayer? So let's say the BBC go, right, Saturday nights, you're going to get BBC 2 between 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock. Yeah, that's your time slot. Or 8:30 to 10:30, then we can hop over to BBC One for Match of the Day. Although having seen the new lineup, no one's going to be watching Match of the Day. I think they've made a fatal error in rejigging it. It needed a Gary Lineker type player, frontman, or an Alan Shearer type frontman. That other guy from Manchester, I don't know what his name is, not very good. And then, the rest of it's just a mess. So you get maybe a BBC 2 slot, but you're going to need slots for things like public workouts and press conferences. What do you do with the press conference, actually? Do you want people ranting and raving, effing and jeffing, and fighting each other at press conferences? That's a tricky one. So you probably keep those off. But you need something that's going to point an audience. So, and I don't even know if EastEnders is still running, but if EastEnders was still running, I'd want an advert for a boxer show coming after that. If Casualty's still on after that, or just before the news, you get a thing like, yeah, there's going to be boxing on BBC this Saturday. If you've got that, then you can do those Channel 5 numbers. Because I think Channel 5, and actually when David Hay was on Dave, he was doing 3 million. I'm hearing Channel 5 do about 5 mil on some of their good fights. Now, can you get to that number? I think you can, but it's going to be very, very important that boxing fans get behind this. It'll be very easy to slag it off. And I know there'll be people waiting to slag it off, which we shouldn't, by the way. Because think about what this deal actually means for Ben Shalom. So for Ben, Sky provided a lot of that know-how and the logistics and how to get an event going and all this. There's a lot of support Sky provide behind the scenes. A lot of wisdom was supposed to be wrapped around Ben. A lot of it didn't come to fruition, which is a shame. But there's a lot of this. Like, there's loads and loads of stuff Sky will do for you to help you elevate. That Ben's now going to have to do himself. So production, you got to go and find someone to do the production. You got to work out who's your team now. who does comms, who does this, who does that. Is it a reboot? You know, have you lost people? Is Savage Dan going to be involved? Is the other guy, Daniel Miller, going to be involved? Are all these guys still going to be involved? What does that lineup look like? And if I'm Ben Shalom, here's the thing I would be doing. I would just be going for edge at this point, and I'd get people who aren't establishment figures, and I'd get them in, and I'd say, right, our job here is to be 50% corporate, 50% renegade. Yeah, we need to give our audience a few nuggets that they can tweet about. If we don't do that, we're never going to draw eyeballs to what we're doing. And that should be the goal. Ben's goal should be make boxer shows trend online, by hook or by crook. And then build from there. But I think you need a whole new setup. I think you're going to, not that you're going to reimagine a boxing production, because they tried that and it didn't work. But you've got to strip it back. So you got to get rid of all these, like we've got Ollie Murs, rings. I don't want any of that nonsense, right? We need it really, really simple. Funny, witty people doing comms. Comms guys that will make the public feel something. That's the important thing. Like Jim Watt used to do. I know we criticized Jim Watt, but he made you feel something. We need people in those sort of Johnny Nelson roles who are competent. And Johnny was competent, by the way. Let's not pretend Johnny doesn't know his boxing. But he's not going to leave Sky. He loves Sky. But all that getting people like Anna Woolhouse in, like, this is the thing we need to avoid. This idea that there has to be a woman presenting or there has to be a woman on the panel. There doesn't have to be anything. Johnny, there does not have to be anything. I'd love for Natasha Jonas to be the anchor of this whole thing. I'm being honest. I'm a big Natasha Jonas fan. But I'm tired of this idea that you have to have X and boxes have to be ticked. Take all that out of boxing. Okay? Just have people on your broadcast that connect with people. Not, if we put, let me think of a name. Amanda Coulson, right? England boxing coach. If we get her on the broadcast, she would draw in this mythical female fan base that never shows up. And it just succeeds in annoying everybody, right? Because we didn't really want to see her. Get people in who have gravitas, who can deliver, right? And then every so often get a Princeton Simon who will just kick the chessboard up in the air, which is fine. You need someone that every so often just kicks the chessboard up in the air, because that's what fans want to see. That they know what they're seeing on that screen. So there's all this stuff that Ben's got to do. But the bigger thing is, who's still going to be signed to Boxer? And how much of the Boxer contract is predicated on being broadcast on Sky? Because one of the things that people are talking about now, we're now talking about the link between being on TNT, being on Sky, being on the BBC versus being on DAZN. Because not many people have DAZN, right? You're not being exposed to a fan base bigger than boxing. And so does that harm you commercially? Potentially. Definitely harms your visibility and makes it harder to promote shows. Essentially, it's going to make it harder to sell tickets. And maybe this is where Ben's got an advantage. If you've got the BBC pushing you during the FA Cup coverage, whenever, does that point people towards, does that point people towards buying tickets? Yes or no? If it does, brilliant. If I'm a fighter and me being on the BBC means I'll go from getting $5,000 a month in sponsorship to 10, brilliant. But the mechanics of this have to be firmly established before you commit to someone like Boxer. You have to say, right, what slots do you have? What times will you be broadcast? How many times a week will there be a Boxer-related advert? Because if you can do that, let's just say you get 5 to 10 spots every week. Perfect. You get, maybe Ben Shalom gets a column on the BBC and stuff like that. You start to grow it out. You know, Ben, I'll ghostwrite that for you if you want. You start to get all this stuff. And I think when it comes together, there's an interesting proposition depending on the mechanics of it and who you can keep on your roster. I don't think you can keep Ben. I don't think you can keep Adam Azim. But you can keep Vidal Riley. You can keep Isaac Chamberlain. You can keep Dan Aziz. You can keep Lauren Price. You can keep Caroline Dubois. Now you start to look at that. You're like, those people will provide entertaining fights. Do you see what I mean? You can rope in fighters from other promotions like a Yusuf Kamari. Stop ignoring Yusuf Kamari, boxer. Pull in guys like Yusuf Kamari. I mean, entertaining guys that will fight. You know, like a Tommy Welsh, although he boxes on Channel 5. Get interesting guys in. You know, Yoka's coming back. Get Yoka involved. There are all these kind of options that could happen if things are played properly. But we need to see the internal details. My worry with Ben and Boxer is when you look at the people who work with and for Boxer, there isn't what I'd call a lot of excellence. Probably good, solid people that do a good job, but there's no excellence. So there's no real drive to blow a hole in the world. You know, I look at people like Nicola McDermott, right, who does a lot of great stuff managing guys like Derek, etc. Like, I see how she grinds and her culture of excellence, and she's been in this boxing thing for at least 10 years. Like, I've known her for 10 years. I look at all these sorts of characters involved in the sport. Even those guys like Jamie Ward at Matchroom, hard grafters who really want to do a good job. And Ben needs to be recruiting those people who really want to elevate the sport. And I think if he can do that and there's a sensible commercial proposition layered on top of this, he might turn out to be the winner here. Because I don't know how long the deal is. Let's say the deal is a year and a half, right? Or 2 years. That's his shop window. That is Ben Shalom's chance to say, I didn't need Sky. My operation is so slick. My operation is so tight. I could sit on a TNT Sport and I could bring you numbers. Because look what I've built over here. People are gagging to see my fights. Let's take them to TNT. And then we can leverage the football and the rugby and pull people in. That's the thinking I would be having right now if I was Ben. Whether he's having that, I don't know. I hope he is. Because this is a golden opportunity for him to say, I'm not just someone that was put in by Sky to babysit their boxing operation. I'm a serious and determined promoter. And I want him to succeed, because if we can get boxing on the BBC, it does a number of things. But the bigger thing that this signals, and I'm going to call this the mega trend, it points to a split now. Are you going to get paid by your promoter, or are you going to get paid by your sponsors? That's going to be the real question. Because the BBC aren't going to be paying anyone £500,000 to box. They're just not. The public will not stomach that. There are enough license payers who do not like boxing anyway. So it's going to have to show that it can wash its own face. So that means if you're a boxer, what you're trying to do is leverage sponsors. And I think being on the BBC will be good, providing you get the right level of exposure. You want the numbers to support, you know, your value. And I think if I'm a young fighter now, I probably want to do my first 10 to 15 fights on the BBC. Because I want to get paid the same regardless of where I go. I want to fight the same people regardless of where I go. Better that I'm seen by more people. Because then when I do transition into the money platforms, people know who I am already. It's a way to build an audience. Whereas I see some guys, and in the boxing world they're known, but outside of boxing they're anonymous. Just think about this. You can get your boxers, depending on who they are, on BBC programs. But we say this all the time and it never happens. But these are the things, if I'm Ben, I'm driving. Or whoever's in his team has to be driving those sorts of things. Encourage the BBC to take a few risks. There's nothing to lose here. You know, people love watching fights. Which brings me to the next point, which is you have to have proper fights. You can't be showing stuff on BBC Two of Prospect X against a 5'75" journeyman. The public aren't here for that. So you're actually going to have meaningful fights on the channel. And someone at the BBC has to be able to look at that card and rubber stamp it and go, that makes sense to me. I hope the BBC have someone like that. I put my hand up for the job. Where you look at a card and you go, yeah, that's trash. He could easily fight someone else. He could fight someone else. He could fight someone else. And it wouldn't be detrimental to his record. But, so you got to look at that and drive those standards. Otherwise, what's the point in doing it? But I do think young fighters really need to weigh this up. Do you want the exposure early in your career, which you can then monetize later? Or do you want the safety and security of being with a promoter who'll do all the work for you? it's going to be different for various people. Like Isaac Chamberlain on the BBC makes perfect sense. Why? Because you do a story about Isaac Chamberlain, the boxer. You do a story about Isaac Chamberlain selling his coffee. Yeah? And then you can start to talk to Isaac about, are you thinking about the end of your career? There are all these sorts of beautiful pieces of content you can leverage now. And it works both ways. But you have to be able to see that as an opportunity. And if I'm Ben, I've got to look past the, we got a TV deal, towards, actually, this is the start of something special. And if he looks at it that way, then I think this could be an absolutely brilliant deal for him. And this could elevate him to a level that he probably hasn't seen yet. But it's all in the planning. But as I said, we've got Ben's boxing channel. He's clearly got some real estate on BBC Two, BBC Three, iPlayer, and the website. He's now just got to make sure what he puts on there is better than anyone else could do. That's the pressure on his shoulders. And on that note, I'll say, take care, guys, and hopefully you enjoyed this episode.